Hello, my name is Valerie Odon, and I work in the SIPS department as a lecturer in immunology. I joined last year in January. I do not have a PhD student yet, so I will focus in a case study. And this is presenting my vision for supervision in my lab, following the supervisor trainings that I undertook here at the University of Strathclyde. So I'm relating on this slide the different trainings the workshop I assisted in, and the tools that I intend to use to weave into my supervision role. And also here, the takeaway message for me is that I learned at the end of each of these workshops. So in terms of the becoming a supervisor and supporting your postgraduate student core workshops, I found that the researcher development framework lends very useful. I will also integrate the time frame over 3 years of progression and review for PhD students. I really like the stakeholder interest exercise that we did, and I will use it, I think, with the students at the beginning of their thesis to really get them thinking, what is success for them? What is success for me? What is success for the university? And really build early on an element of purpose. I really, of course, also will use the student agreement. Online, I took the diversity in the workplace and bullying and harassment workshops for managers, and it was very interesting to have that list of what are the individual biases that we all bring to conversations. So it really drilled it really illustrated for me the need for an ethical and very clear boundaries when it comes to dignity and respect. And what really that showed me is in the end, it's not just about science, it's also about a relationship. And because people are different and equal does not mean the same need, that relationship has to take into account the needs of the individual, and that it has to be, so the supervision has to be adaptable. Of course, there will be moments when I would need help, but there are plenty of specialized member of staff that can support mentors and so on and so forth. In the team approach to problem solving and a day-to-day category of workshop, we discuss common problems that students would have. We discuss this also into the supervisor training. I really liked that this workshop focused on the six Debono's hats, and how I found it a very elegant and neutral way to have conversations that are purposeful and that can keep things moving in a very, very, fun and productive way. So I think this is also would be something that I would use regularly in our meetings. Now, perhaps let's put a black hat, what could go wrong, sort of exercise. In terms of academic writing workshop and understanding yourself and others, what really was interesting is that we look back onto the personality aspect of things and people as individuals. It was very clear that despite the fact that students would have different ways of writing and different needs, they will still need to have a lot of preparation that spans years so they can build that knowledge. So all in all, I realize here that one size does really not fit all. But throughout this landscape of training, what really came apparent to me is that my supervision has to be intentional. And there is an element of scaffolding that student has to come across so they can build upon other, in a confident way. And that means that this process will have to have some element of assessment for myself and for the student. In terms of the case study today, I'm actually relating Veronica's case study. This is a woman who is actually pregnant and who has to go through a viva. Really, the gist of this story is that she's really badly prepared for a defense. She has a problematic thesis that even her internal supervisor have difficulties passing. She also has a lot of very difficult, emotionally painful personal circumstances and a baby on the way. Now, when she goes to the first viva, she meets examiners. She loops through this process over and over 3 times, She has the same examiners, first that has quite a lot of um, anchoring bias. They are quite critical of her. It undermines her confidence. She is failing a viva. Then there is not enough timely and decisive response from the management, which means that she's presenting pretty much the same problematic thesis over again. And this is made worse because she needs a thesis and a PhD to continue working as a lecturer. Now, if I was to use the tools that we've discussed into the workshops, and apply it to that situation, this would have really improved a lot of the outcomes that we had. For example, if they did use the RDF lens, they would have actually created from the onset a program of development. And as a better researcher, she wouldn't have the outcome that she does have now, which is a poor quality thesis, really. If that was addressed, I think the rest would not have been so much of a problem. Now, if they did have a review process that wasn't in place, where they would have caught the problem with the thesis on time. The one is actually wondering why that thesis was left to go all the way after 4.5 years to the Viva, and why didn't they do something about it earlier? But instead of having a review process, now what they do have is a problematic situation that is emotionally very painful for a lot of people. If they did follow policies on equality and diversity, they would have had a very completely different attitude to this entire situation. They would have maybe offered her a maternity leave, and they would have probably used a convener like we do here in Strathclyde, have a third person in the Viva, a convener, to monitor that this has been carried out with fairness and respect. But instead, because they don't have such things, there's no respect for her personal circumstances, and there is no monitoring of the dignity and the respect as well to herself. So if they did apply, say, for example, the black hat from the team approach and problem solving workshop, they would have actually had a meeting where they purposely thought about what could go wrong, even if they did have that meeting after a first failed Viva, they would have not had go through another round as she has now have to do to about 1.5 years, 2 years post PhD time. If they did have a set of workshop that were, for helping with academic writing, if that was taken into consideration, maybe also that would have improved the quality of the manuscript, or at least given her tools to work better, and the rewrite would probably not be so extensive. And finally, if they did have a culture that was actually integrating evaluation of personalities like we do here, and proposing the understanding yourself and others, they would have created a better emotional setting that looks after people's well-being instead of this situation that really creates enormous stress. But what this drove for me is that really we needed to catch problem very early on and apply the tools that's necessary to address it. Then the situation can be addressed early. It doesn't degenerate in painful situations afterwards. I use this particular time frame here that I took from the postgraduate handbook to show that actually really people, even though it is 3 years, they end up having a 2-year time where they would have to produce this thesis, because the write-up takes 3 months, but because they are really very beginners when they come to us, it is fair to assume that there will be a period where they're initiating, knowledge, and they're learning the protocol for the first time in the first 9 months. So my idea is to use the lens and create what I call a structured progression towards research independence. Of course, I actually looked at that and wondered, what would a newly minted doctor of virology, which is my specialty, what would it look like when he or she or they have their thesis? Of course, they would have specialist knowledge, and they would have certain skills like critical assessment, evaluating the literature, and also some integrity and a lot of responsibility. So how do I build a beginner to actually have a profile that looks like that over the 3 years? So I deconstructed from this a step, the different protocols and attitude, and organize them in a spectrum of complexity. For example, a proteomic project requires a lot of advanced skills, but it is essentially using some very core elements that are easy to master. So I'm proposing that I would actually offer students this sheet as well as these lenses and or weave into these 9 months and the 3 years a formative feedback forms that I will give to them that actually looks and assesses what they're doing well, what needs consolidation, and what requires much more attention on their part. They will be given some demonstrations so they know what the standard is, but then plenty of time and some sort of extracurricular learning activities and resources that to consolidate their learning in a way that supports them. In my hope that they would actually take this and by themselves, develop their own at their own pace. So I did the same folder here, the same RDF here for the 3 and 9 months. And of course, I do not expect them to have a lot of knowledge, but by 3 months, they have built some knowledge. However, what I am looking for is this element of the personality, such as responsibility and enthusiasm, perseverance, that will allow them to really drive their project and do the heavy lifting work within the next 2 years to get the data they need for a thesis. Of course, I also did an RDF for my own, for myself, for my own development. I have a lot of blue because I've done a lot of postdocs. So there's still plenty of things to learn, so it can never be fully blue. However, I've identified 3 areas that really require my attention over the next couple of years. I'd like to include more element of self-reflection into my laboratory, not just in terms of my own supervision, but also things like, how I'm doing the management of the lab, my grant applications, the collaboration, and so on and so forth, so I can find elements that I can work on to keep on improving and moving forward. But in the shorter term, over the next 2 years, what I really need is actually more development in terms of supervision and teaching. And I've identified, these are new roles for me. So I've identified some classes that I need to take with OSDU, the PG Cert training, as well as implementing this RDF lens in the lab. But really, other trainings that I have not taken yet that I will want to do over the next couple of years, so that to keep my skills and keeping the reflection going. This has been a very useful training for me. It helped me clarify my thoughts about supervision. At the same time, I am keeping this presentation under 15 minutes because with YouTube, I cannot upload a video over 15 minutes without giving my private phone number, which I do not want to do. But thank you very much. Bye.